Good morning.
Good morning.
I do have a pitcher of water up here with me because first service went horribly and every word was pure agony. So I'm just being prepared. But yeah, just to me, hopefully not to the listeners. But as you can tell, I am not Jason. I do have a little bit more hair than he does. It's located in a different spot, but he's balding in the back. I'm balding in the front. So some of you may be happy I'm here, or just recently, some of you may be looking forward to next week. So, uh, well, yeah. You got to do what you got to do. But I'm glad to be with all of you guys here this morning. I don't get the chance to preach every week or every other week, but I always do like it whenever I do have the opportunity to do, and especially whenever I get to talk in a series that's as strong and as compelling as the one we're in right now. This I wish Jesus hadn't have said that series. And I think we can all agree that if you've been paying attention to these sermons, then you've probably been gut checked a time or two, or your priorities have been reevaluated regarding your faith a time or two. That has probably happened because we've covered topics like self-denial. We've covered topics like love for our enemies and this unconditional forgiveness. And last week, Jason talked about money. Thankfully, I'm not talking about that today. But we are going to be looking into this idea of staying awake, which is something I expect to see everybody doing today. But before we do that, let's go ahead and pray. Father, we come before you right now just honored and humbled that you chose us out of everybody to make in your image and to chase us with this love and to offer us this grace. And I just pray right now that you will help us to accept that, help us to understand it, help us to grow in our relationship with you every day of our life. And I just pray that you will be with us this morning as we have this opportunity to fellowship and to learn and to grow together. And I pray that you help us not to take it to granted, but to use it for our own edification. And Father, I just pray that you will be with me as I present your word. Help me to do it accurately and in a manner that truthfully reflects what you want to be said. Father, we love you. Amen. So I have a question for you guys. Do you have any go-to techniques for staying awake? When you're tired, do you have any go-to techniques for staying awake? Coffee. Caffeine. Okay, that opens the door. What? Your wife punched you. Mitty wouldn't do that. So, cold water. Or take a cold shower. Those are both horrible. I can't believe some people do those every day. So you do have these options. Like, you can drink coffee. You can get up and move around. Some people exercise to stay awake. I don't like that one personally. Some people eat food, which is more up my alley. Or some people play games on their phone, which, as much as this thing can do, most of us just use it for simple games. But all those things you can do to stay awake. And when I was in college, I worked night shifts while I had class during the day for a year. And it was one of the worst years of my life. As far as I was just always exhausted. I would have class all day. I was a teacher's assistant, which took out a couple hour block in the evening, early evening. And then I would clock into work at the YMCA at 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night. I'd get off at 4:30 or 5 in the morning, go back to the dorm, shower, go to bed, and get up at 7:30 for class. And so I did that for a year, and I'm still paying the price for it. But needless to say, I had a need to find something that worked to keep me awake during those times. And what I actually found was chewing on ice, chewing on crushed up ice, just all the time, 24/7 worked pretty well. I have sensitive teeth, and so the pain just kept me awake. But it also freezes you a little bit, It's good. It keeps you focused and sharp even when you're just dragging. But in all the times that I had to drive back and forth from Missouri for college and now to visit my fiance, there were a lot of times that I was driving back late at night, or I would schedule my drive to be late at night because I don't want to waste daytime when we could be with each other driving on 64. So I'd drive through the night, but what that meant is that I would be up all day and then drive 8.5 hours to go see her, to be up all day. And a lot of times we only get to see each other for, if I drive down on a Thursday night or a Friday night, we get a few hours on Saturday, then I have to come right back up here. So a lot of times, if you see me dragging on Sunday morning, that's probably why. But I had this giant need to stay awake, or to desperately stay awake. And on nights when that drive just felt like it was going to be impossible to stay awake, I would crank up the air conditioner, and I know this sounds a little unconventional. I would crank up the air conditioner, and then I would stop at a gas station, and I'd buy a half a cup of coffee and a can of Red Bull. And I would cut the coffee with the Red Bull. And I know what you're thinking, and you're absolutely correct. It is the most disgusting thing you will ever drink. It is terrible. I do not recommend it, but it worked. I have a natural caffeine tolerance, I think probably because I drank so much of it growing up. But that mixture was the perfect concoction of what would keep me up. But staying awake, especially when you're driving, is critical, isn't it? But Jesus was concerned for us to stay awake too. He wasn't concerned with the type of alertness that makes you find yourself chugging coffee and Red Bull, but he was concerned about a spiritual awareness and alertness. Our key verse this morning is Mark 13:33, which reads, "Be on guard, keep awake, for you do not know the time will come." So right away, this kind of sets the overall, the overall message of the message. The theme. Thank you. I have graduated college. This sets the overall theme for the message. And it's essentially repent or perish. I feel like I could just do one of those old church sermons where that's just all you elaborate on. But that theme is present, and that theme is not present at the same time. See, Mark chapter 13 is one of the more complicated passages to kind of unfold and to kind of see what Jesus is trying to get us to understand. And it's really just because of his distinctions that he's drawing in this passage. You'll hear language about the destruction of the Jewish temple, and then you'll turn right around and you'll hear language right about the second coming of Christ. And so that's a very important topic you want to make sure you get right, mixed in with historical facts and foretelling. So this is one of the more complicated passages that I've had to study and that I've had to read and work through, and I've had multiple headaches this week, but I just wanted to make sure that I could get it to boil it down. So it's really a matter of reading and working through this passage to see where Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple, or seeing where Jesus is talking about his second coming, or sometimes you'll find him talking about both at the same time. And that's just what makes it confusing. But throughout today, we'll actually be jumping around a little bit throughout the passage to get the truth that quite possibly could shake up our faith a little bit. But for now, we're going to start at the beginning, right where this discourse starts. Mark 13, 1-4 says, maybe. "And as he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, 'Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings.' And Jesus said to him, 'Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down.' And as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite of the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, Tell us when these things will be, and what will the sign be when all these things are about to be accomplished? So to set the stage here, Jesus and his disciples are leaving the temple where Jesus has been teaching. He's been answering questions. He's been putting the Pharisees in his place. He's been doing all this for days. Now they're walking out. And this temple is so important in the Jewish culture. Way more important than we probably think it is. They worshiped there. They offered their sacrifices there. They fellowshiped there. The Pharisees were making a money market out of it. The temple is kind of where the entire community would focus around. So they took great pride in their temples. In fact, they placed such a high emphasis on their temples that this one was starting to be constructed around 20 BC. And it was completed around 66 AD. So that's several decades that they were constructing it. But when it was done, it was bigger and better than any other temple in the ancient world at that time. So I'm just going to ramble off some quick facts about it just to get the magnitude of it. Some of the foundational stones were 40 feet long, 12 feet high, and 18 feet thick. One stone for the foundation. Also, you might want an open feel for your house, maybe with a little patio in the middle. This temple came with a modest patio, modest courtroom or courthouse in the middle that was 400 yards by 500 yards. So that's a lot of football fields you can have in that. I wouldn't want to have to mow that yard. But they took pride in their temple. But they took pride in it. The disciples did, at least, because they thought Jesus, when he left that, he was going to turn right around and take it over. The disciples had all this idea of what Jesus was going to do every time he walked into something. They thought Jesus was going to be this awesome military leader when he came in, and he was just going to help them dominate all the other kingdoms on earth. But he didn't. They thought when he rode into Jerusalem, he was just going to be this hero riding on a lion or something. And he rode in on a donkey. He's always had a different perspective on things. And he had no intention on taking over this temple. So they were probably walking through it before Jesus laid this news on them. They're probably walking through it just pointing out what areas would be theirs, maybe where their offices or where their little hangouts would be, or what all they could do with this building. And then Jesus said these words that shocked them. The entire temple is going to be destroyed. And it'll be so bad that no stone will be left on top of each other. Now, to them, that probably came out of nowhere. I mean, they were just literally admonishing this building. They were thinking, it's marvelous. These stones are so big. They're so white. They're awesome. So naturally, they had questions when Jesus responded to them like that. They had two questions. When will these things be? Which is a good question. But what are the signs that we'll see whenever this is about to happen? Those were the two questions they had. So right here, they heard that the temple would be destroyed, and they immediately wanted to know when it was going to happen. So the rest of the chapter, verses 5 through 37, is just Jesus explaining to them when that would happen, what it's going to look like, and we're all good. And honestly, I wish it was going to end there. I wish this entire chapter was about Jesus rambling on about the history of the temple, because it would make our lives so much easier. Make my life easier. Sure, make your life easier, because we don't actually have to dig deeper. But Jesus knew that we needed to have a lesson from this. He knew that we needed to apply something from this in our lives. So instead, he's all throughout this chapter, he's speaking in parallels between the destruction of the temple and his second coming. So when the disciples wanted signs to know when the destruction was coming, Jesus offered them truths of what would happen when he comes. So in the next few verses, Jesus gives them the signs. In verse 7, he says that there will be wars and rumors of wars. And verse 8 mentions nations rising against nations, kingdoms against kingdoms, and mentions that there will be widespread earthquakes in regions and famines that encapsulate entire races or regions. Verse 9 mentions Christians being persecuted. Verse 12 mentions families being divided over the gospel. I could see that today. Certain parts of the world matches each one of those. But I could also see that same deal across the last 2,000 years. A lot of people, when they read the text like this, they immediately think, well, you know, the famine's going on, the earthquakes just happened in California, and there's probably going to be a bigger one soon. They cherry pick all these, and we just convince ourselves that Jesus is going to come back today. But when you look at history, this is how it's been for, you know, the past 2,000 years. And Jesus is all just saying that this is what life is going to be like until he comes back. It's not saying the next time you hear an earthquake, duck and cover because Jesus is coming. It's saying that there will be stuff like that until Jesus comes back. But when the disciples heard this, they heard a warning. They didn't hear what we hear. So they were hearing Jesus tell them to prepare themselves for the buildup of the destruction of Jerusalem. They heard to watch the signs, to prepare themselves, and to be ready to take whatever action they need to in order to escape. They were given their signs. But for us, eagerly anticipating the return of the Lord, we don't have any signs. And there's probably a good reason for that. Mark 13:32-33 says, "But concerning that day or that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, keep awake, for you do not know the time will come." And that's what Jesus said that I wish he hadn't. Can I tell you why? Because I want to prepare. I would be a lot happier if I had street signs or big flashing LED signs in my face that told me when I need to start getting ready. But that's because I want to see those signs. I want to get ready when I want to get ready. So I apologize to those heading out to eat after the service today. I will be one of you. But I'm just going to apologize because you're probably going to hate me in about 30 seconds. When you eat at restaurants, I bet you try not to think about the horrible mess that's in the kitchen. Yeah, we're going there. I bet you try not to think about that. But it's really easy for restaurant managers and people who work in behind the scenes of the restaurant to overlook basic cleanliness and basic food prep in light of profits. The Golden Corral in New Boston just got shut down for this exact same thing. So it's out there. But when does that problem get fixed? Well, it'd be when the health inspector comes by. When the health inspector comes by, typically they have to call you ahead of time 24 hours early to set up an appointment. I don't know if that's changed, but when I was familiar with the rules, it was 24 hours. So do you think the restaurant owners just sit around and wait for the health inspector to show up? Or do you think they rustle up everybody they can, spend those 24 hours cleaning everything and storing all the food properly? They're definitely working in that kitchen to get them to pass. But if the health inspector was there every single day, what do you think that kitchen would look like? If every single day there was this threat that they could be shut down, that kitchen would look really nice. And those steaks would be properly stored in the fridge. That potato salad would be in the fridge. I told you, about 30 seconds, you guys. If we're honest with ourselves, though, this is how we treat our faith. Sometimes. We live however we want to every day of the week except for Sunday. Sunday is this magical day where we have to get dressed and pretend everything's good because we're going to church. We're going to be around the minister, so we have to act like our life's put together. And it's one of the most discouraging things for me, for some of the other ministers I've talked to, because it's almost hard for us to develop those real relationships because people think they have to have it all together around us. And I'm sure if you're a strong Christian in your community, I'm sure people feel that same way about you. It's difficult. If we're given any signs or warnings of Jesus' return, then we're just going to look for them. And when we see them, then we're going to start getting ready. When we see those signs, then we know that, okay, now I can start praying without ceasing. When we see those signs, then now I know that I need to start telling other people about Jesus. When we see those signs, I can start showing that authentic love that knows no bounds for everybody. And when I see those signs, then I can start modeling my life after Jesus every single day. And so on. When we see those signs. But until then, I'm going to do what I want. Here's the deal. When we wait for those signs to come for us, when we have that mindset, do you know what we're telling Jesus in our hearts? It's essentially telling him that we're a lukewarm Christian that doesn't care about him, but only wants what he can give us. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be a part of a relationship where I'm treated like that. If someone's only reaching out to me when they need me, or when they need something from me, that's not a healthy relationship. To truly desire God is to honor him with every aspect of our lives all the time. Every one of our thoughts, every one of our actions, every one of our words should all be filtered through this lens of what would honor God most in that moment. Jesus gives us a little glimpse as to what this would look like. Verses 34 through 36 say, it's like a man going away. He leaves his house and he puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. Jesus said this once, but a lot of times if people say things once, I like to overlook it, because you can kind of think it's not that important. So let's just go to it a second time. In Matthew 24. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known of what time the thief would have come, and he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. Okay, so now we're up to 2. Matthew 24, starting at verse 45. I don't know how Jason does this. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master has set over the household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find doing so when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut him into pieces and throw him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's a really positive verse. From all this, Jesus is very clear that nobody knows when he's going to come back. But he will. And when he does, he'll be gathering up everybody that has accepted him and everybody that's living for him. You know, the thief never told the homeowner when he was going to break in and rob him, or else the homeowner would have been prepared. The master never told his servants when he would be getting home, but he expected them to be prepared. And just like that, the date and the time of Jesus' return is not for us to know. But he commands that we are ready when it happens. When our master is away, we are to keep busy doing the things that he has given us to do. Put another way, the main thrust of what Jesus is saying is those of us who follow him, claim him as our Lord and Savior, are to live our lives in the light of his return all the time. So, we are to always love God and others. We're to always serve Christ by reaching others. We're to always glorify God by enjoying him now and looking forward to forever. And to some degree, that sounds pretty good to us. That's pretty much what we would expect from a Sunday morning service. But can we make it hurt a little bit more? We all have a tendency to be about ourselves, even if we don't do it intentionally. A lot of our unintentional thoughts or emotions or reactions, we might not mean to display it, but we're focusing on us. We want our lives to be focused around my joy, my comfort, my pleasure, my ease, and so on. But that's not an option for a follower of Christ. Romans 12:1 is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. When we choose to follow Christ, we commit to using our life to serve Christ. We're no longer servants of ourselves. What we want cannot hold any weight against what God wants from us. But if we're honest with ourselves, we don't really get that all the time. We don't really want to get that all the time. Colossians 3 gives us a really good breakdown of how we sometimes act versus how we're commanded to act. So it starts out in Colossians 3:5-10, where how we what's called our old self. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must also rid yourself of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have been taken off your old self with its practices and have put on your new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. We cannot live as a living sacrifice to God if we are holding on to any of these things. If we are actively holding on and not willing to give up these things, our worship is meaningless because we're not focused. But here's the deal. Colossians 3:12-14 tells us what it looks like when we remain awake in our faith. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Are we living our lives in a manner that reflects that? Have you fallen asleep at the wheel of your faith? Think for a moment about the tasks you do, the words you say, the music you listen to, the environment that you put yourself in, whatever else you may do. And I'm fully aware that Jesus knows our thoughts and our actions at all times. But just imagine all the things that you do. Now imagine God walking in, or Jesus walking in while you're in the middle of that. Imagine the shame you would feel if you're doing or saying something that is inappropriate or unhelpful towards him. But imagine the joy you would feel if you're doing something that pleases and honors him. Here's the deal. If we want to have an authentic relationship with Christ, then we must stay awake. I mentioned what I did to stay awake while driving earlier, but what would have happened if I fell asleep at the wheel going 80 miles on Interstate 64? 72. Tragedy. I probably wouldn't be here right now. If we lose concentration for even a second, sleep will pounce on us. And sin is like that. Creeps up on us, whispers gently in our ear, it dims the lights, it plays that soft music in our ears. But its only intention is our ruin. The good news is that we were bought at a price. And through that sacrifice that Jesus gave for us on the cross, sin holds no bounds on us. We are free. We are given a new life. We're given a new title. We're no longer defined by all the sin and garbage in our life, but we're defined by the fact that God views us as holy and blameless and washed in his eyes. But we need to stay awake. You might be here this morning and you might have dozed off a little bit in your faith. You might have kind of let go of the wheel for a little bit. And if that's you, then I encourage you to talk with us. And we'll see if we can develop a plan for you to get back on that track. Or you might be here today and you've just never really made the decision to follow Christ. And if that's you, then we'd love to talk to you. But I'm going to pray, and if you want to talk, come up during this next song. Father, thank you once again for this opportunity we have to come here and worship you and to learn more about you and to grow and fellowship with each other without fear of really any negative consequence coming from us. That is a blessing that we take for granted all too soon or all too often. And I just pray that you'll be with everyone here as we just fully understand what you desire from us and learn more about that. And that you are calling us to not be complacent in this life, but to be active in the role of our faith. So that when we come against trials or we come against anything that can strip us away from you, that we have the mindset to turn away from it and run. And then that we can help others do the same. And ultimately, through all that, we'll be honoring you, giving you the glory. Father, I just pray that you will be with us all as we embark on this challenge. Father, we love you. Amen.